All right. Well, welcome everybody. We've got a few attendees joining us live here on our webinar through Zoom feature. If you don't know me, my name is Eric Miller, and I am the Director of Ministry Operations with CE National. We're excited to have you with us today. We're doing another digital lab. If you're new to our digital lab, you can check us out at cenational.org, or buildmomentum.org is our youth conference that we've been doing all these digital labs through. We're trying to provide you with some content that would help you to be on mission and learn in a unique area. So today we've got some of the staff from Marysville Grace. Marysville is just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And we're talking about how do you avoid silos. Silos in ministry is it's a term that oftentimes we talk about in church world, in leadership. And we have our youth pastor, Tyler Kramer, with us. He's the pastor of student ministries. Tyler, how long have you been at Marysville? And kind of just give us a brief, how'd you get there?
Yeah, so I've been on staff here at Marysville for just over 6 years. And really I knew people. And so I was able to connect in that way. And then have come on, and we have went through a ride just with youth ministry and trying to take what from all my understanding was a fairly siloed ministry and really tried to integrate it to the church well over these past 6 years. And it's been a process for sure.
Yeah, now Pastor Clancy Cruz is the lead pastor there at Marysville. Clancy has done a phenomenal job of building a team around him to execute vision, to lead through each ministry. And years ago, he had a guy named Jeremy Bury, who is his worship pastor. Jeremy is now the executive pastor. Jeremy, tell us a little bit about your role and what you get to do there at the church.
So I started, 13 years ago as worship pastor. And then almost 6 years ago, I kind of made a transition because we also went from a smaller church to a bigger church at that time. And so functionally, a lot of those things that Clancy didn't want to do, I was already doing anyways. So that kind of turned into, this one job, and I'm like, we should call this executive pastor because it sounds better than whatever we're not calling it now. Thus began our executive pastorship, and here I am still.
That's awesome. You must be doing a great job then. I've heard nothing but good things about you being in that role, so thank you for joining us today. We also have Rich Hancock with us. We will not judge him based on the hat that he is wearing, but based on the words that he says. So, Rich, we're excited to have you with us today. Rich is a life group pastor. I understand that you have been doing this for just over a year, and you were a volunteer before that. So tell us, how'd you get on staff? What was that like?
Yeah, so I worked in physical therapy for probably 15 years, and we attended Marysville Grace in 2011, my wife and I did, and we loved the church and just started to serve there. Got involved in the life group ministry, children's ministry. Then we served on the elder board for a year, and Pastor Jeremy and Clancy approached me and asked me what were my thoughts about coming on staff full-time as the life group's pastor. So that's kind of the pathway that I took. That's been about 18 months ago now. So
that's awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you for joining us, guys. We're excited to dive into our conversation today. Jeremy, you have been working hard with your team, I know, and Tyler even pitched us this idea here recently of, hey, we've been talking about these things on our team of how do we avoid silos. I understand you guys have a children's ministry there. There's lots of other ministries and things that are going on there in Marysville as your church continues to grow, as you see God at work. But our biggest goal for this conversation today is to help other churches, other staff, team members, youth pastors, all the way across the board to be able to learn how to work together as a team. And so many times in churches, the children's ministry just kills it in their area. The youth ministry builds their own ministry, and they kind of do the things that they do best. And they don't necessarily work together. There's not like brainstorming with how do we get our elementary school kids into the middle school program, or how do we transition, and what does that even look like coming out of high school? And so Tyler had pitched me this idea for a digital lab and said, these are important things that we've got to figure out with not just our church, with Marysville, but also with other churches within our Charis Fellowship, churches that are connected to CE National, that we want to help equip. So that's the goal for our conversation today. We're going to talk through some ways that you can avoid sliding into a singular focused ministry within your church. For those of you joining us live, we want to do a Q&A. So there's a question answer box down below. You can drop a question in if you're watching with us live on Zoom. And if you'd like to ask questions for any of our upcoming webinars, our digital labs, you can join us live. We'll also share this to Facebook and YouTube and all our social media. So let's do this. Let's dive in. First of all, I just would love to know from you guys, or anybody who's not familiar with that term, silo. I kind of briefly explained it there, but what does it mean for you guys, for your church, and kind of how do you talk around that word, and how do you avoid that? Just touch base on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think for us, I've always kind of understood the term as if you get, especially in regards to youth ministry, because I think youth ministries are sometimes the most susceptible to falling into the silo, is if you gave us a budget and a building, we would be our own church. And we could do everything by ourselves. And it's just this massive disconnect. And so I know for us, as we talk here, we talk a lot about just helping each other out, and we're in, one team and one score. We're trying to be on the same page. And so I know for us, we have a lot of the same, vision. Like our vision is, learn it, live it, give it. And so everything we do falls underneath those three things. And we try to work together to make sure that we're all hitting those marks, because if we're off doing something else, then we're not really trying to play on the same team.
Yeah, Jeremy, what about you? How would you define the term silo, and how do you help the team avoid one?
Yeah, so I'm happy to hear Tyler say some of my buzzwords there. You passed the test. Silo for us in Marysville, Ohio, is a big, tall thing that holds corn. I actually have one at my house.
There you go.
I think it does start with how we define a win. So how are you successful? And most of the time in our ministries, we feel successful, especially if we're the director of a ministry, if our ministry is successful. And so we have to really go back to the beginning and say, all right, well, if we're a football team and someone gets an interception, then that doesn't make a difference if you're losing 49-0. And sometimes you see that happen in an actual football game, and you're like, that guy is disconnected with reality. He's celebrating right now, and they're losing 49-0. And that's not a win. And so we go back to the very beginning and start with what's a win. And for us, that was bringing a person through the process of discipleship. And so that really starts to carry over. Well, I care about what children's ministry is doing, and I need to support children's ministry because that's part of my team. I think one other really critical function in that is, if you're not intentional about that, that won't happen. So we naturally will go to the things that we care about, and then we'll start to create what's a win unless it's already defined.
That's really good. Yeah, the things that you focus on, the things that you measure, you're saying, that's often where your attention goes. Yeah. So, Rich, how does small groups play a role then within avoiding silos? How do you try and avoid that? How does small group integrate within the church?
I think Jeremy has done an excellent job of just helping us understand that we are one team. And it's natural, like they said, for you to just focus in on your ministry. And within the life group ministry, as the director of life groups, I'm trying to be aware of what other ministries are doing, and then not overcommit people from life groups because maybe they need to, or their kids need to do something with another ministry. So we try to take a global view, at least from the life group ministry, and say, all right, youth ministry is doing this here, children's ministry is doing this here. Let's make sure that everybody's lining up and we're all working together for one thing instead of we have multiple different people going in different directions.
Yeah. I think that's important to think through, and maybe let's spend a minute here just kind of thinking through for other churches, right? Or even for you guys in your church in the past. I know many of you have wore a lot of hats. Rich, I understand you were a youth pastor for a while. Jeremy as a worship pastor. Why do you think siloing happens in ministries and churches especially? Why is it so easy to slip into that?
I mean, I'll start. I think it's easy to slip in that because you just think about what you need to accomplish. Like, this is what life groups needs to do, or this is what youth ministry needs to do. We've always done these things, and you're kind of just focused on you instead of the whole picture. I think that's where the foundation of siloing starts, where you don't really have a global view of what's going on. You're just really looking at what do I need to do? What do I need to check off my list so that my ministry continues to move forward, but my tasks are accomplished?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that. I think that we have to, many times it's like, oh, hey, like it's all about my ministry because that's my worth, or it's about, what we can do. And I got to, prove that this is a valuable ministry. And so we got to make it the best in the church, when all actuality, like, to give a metaphor, like you can't skip leg day. Like you need to strengthen every muscle. And so even if your ministry is the arm, you're one body, and you have to make sure that we are all pulling our weight and working together, because when you lift, you use your entire body, not just, we don't just, silo and say, oh, I just care about this. We work together totally.
Yeah. Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
Just going back to before, like it's what's natural to happen. So unless you have something preventing it from happening, it will. So we shouldn't be surprised when it happens. Like these guys said, it's your job. It's what you care about. So I think the reason it happens a lot of times is because we haven't built anything to prevent it.
Yeah. No, this is awesome. My brain is firing on a bunch of cylinders here, and there's a ton of ways that I want to take this, and I know a lot of questions I want to ask you guys, but before we rush into like how do we avoid this, let's drill down a little bit deeper, because I know for all of us, we probably know of another church that you see, and Tyler, I like your analogy. It's like the youth ministry is thriving and killing it. And it's like the guy who's, really out of weight, or out of shape, but he's got that one huge bicep on just his right arm, and his left arm, everything else is unattended to, right? So that's a good picture for us. What are some factors that you see in other churches, maybe we're not going to name names or talk about any of that today, but what are some of those factors, right? That, and Tyler, you even mentioned, maybe you can talk to this, youth ministry specifically silo more than other ministries. You mentioned a building and a budget. A lot of youth ministries have their own building and a budget, or their own space and their own budget. What are other factors maybe? And part of the reason I'm asking these questions, we know what that looks like, but maybe for somebody who's listening today and they're like, no, I don't, we work together well. And then as we talk maybe through some of these factors, they'll go, oh, we do that. So help us in that. Help us understand that.
Yeah, so I think a couple ideas, a couple thoughts that I have in, things that I've struggled with is, as youth ministry, most youth pastors start out as a young guy, fresh out of college. And we know that being young, we have that zeal, we have that passion, but what that can transition to without us realizing is, hey, I have something to prove. I can prove that I am valuable enough. I can prove that I'm a real pastor. I can prove that all these things. And so what I do is I end up taking everything on myself because I want to prove that I can do it all. And it really becomes about me and what I can do rather than about the church and what God is doing in the church. And so I think a lot of times it's like, man, when I feel like I have something to prove, that's when I start to silo. But when and I think the youth pastors that do such a great job at not siloing are the ones that are doing and are involved in other ministries, not just the youth ministry. And then I think it also comes down to trust or lack of trust. When you come on staff for the first time, you're trying to like get everything going. Well, you don't really know these guys that you're working with, the people that you're working with. And so over time, you have to develop that trust and through relationships. I mean, it doesn't just come from, staff meetings, but through a relationship with that person. Do you understand that they love Jesus just like you love Jesus, and that, man, they care about the spiritual well-being of the church as well? And so do you allow them to speak in? Do you allow them to, to really build that trust with one another to say, okay, hey, like, I know they're not just trying to tell me no because they don't want the youth ministry doing this, but there's an actual reason and purpose behind it. And I think the third thing that comes to mind is, and this is one that I've been learning from Rich quite a bit this past year, is being willing to sacrifice. And when you as a ministry and a ministry leader can sacrifice for your church, there's been many conversations where Rich and I have talked, and we can get into this later if we want, but like where Rich is saying, hey, like one of us has to say no to our ministry, or, we can't double book or double schedule. And so both sides, not just the youth ministry all the time, but sometimes it's life groups, sometimes it's this ministry, sometimes it's, student ministry, whatever ministry it is, you have to say, okay, hey, I'm going to step back so that this ministry can thrive in this situation.
So what are some of those pieces then? Because, for a youth ministry, when you've got, as a youth ministry, you've got a praise band, you've got you've got small groups within your youth ministry, you've got a volunteer team, probably of adults who serve, you've got your own like little mini staff meetings, maybe you have student leaders who you're trying to engage in first impressions kinds of things, welcoming, like you're trained. And within a church, you've got all of those things as well. And so are there ways that you can work together in those areas, or are there, what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, Rich, why don't you take this one? Because we've talked a lot about, especially life groups and stuff.
Yeah, so we've shared a lot of stuff. So when I first started, we worked on a new training and how we were going to train leaders moving forward. And life groups for adults have been going on for about 7 or 8 years, and we were kind of moving in a direction. And Pastor Tyler and Pastor Jeremy were starting to make a shift where students were going to be a majority life group based platform. And Tyler and I have talked over multiple conversations on, okay, how are adults doing this? And what we've come to find out is that, the student life group leaders and the adult life group leaders, they should go through the same training. So we work together. I will help train student life group leaders. It isn't because they all go to our church. We're all we're all on the same team. So we've worked pretty hard on trying to make the same thing happen. So if an adult life group leader says, hey, I want to take a break and help out with students, they're already trained and ready to go. On the other end too, we would like to move up and start working with adults. Great. You guys have the same training and you're ready to go. That's just one example of how we've done that, worked hard on trying to support one another, and also be aware that we're not competing against each other. We're working together. And how can we do those things? And in fact, as the life groups pastor, there are different things that the youth ministry does that I'm encouraging, like, listen, we want to do this together. The student ministries is holding this event. We want life groups there supporting that. Same for children's ministry. We want our life groups to support that.
I love it. I love that. Yeah, I think there are ways where you can work together. And as you learn how to do that, it's going to make both sides of the ministry better, because you're open then to receiving feedback, input, questions, the whole 9 yards on all of that. So that's awesome. I was telling you guys earlier, I was a pastor for 15 years, youth pastor for 15 years, and a small group pastor for 2 years. And those were they're real tensions that you fight through. And where we saw growth was oftentimes where we were able to merge our ministries together and see multiplication rather than just addition. So that's awesome.
So Eric, just something else on that from a structure standpoint, from a really like functional perspective. So if you've been in church a long time, you've probably had like a group of people go on a missions trip, and then they've come back and they've said like, hey, let's have a lunch, and then we'll show you like all the slides from our missions trip. And they're like super stoked about it. And then the people get into the lunch and they're like, man, is this over yet? I've seen this picture, because in reality, what's happened is they're trying to like share an experience that these people haven't had. And so I really think one of the, like, from a functional perspective, one of the things that needs to happen in the conversation that we're having right now is the lead pastor needs to go somewhere with the youth pastor. I went to Passion with Tyler on his trip and let him lead the trip. Like, I didn't lead the trip. If I did, the coffee would have been better, right? It was terrible. It was like an afterthought. It was an afterthought, coffee. And, he led the trip, and I came along and watched him and then helped him out, did whatever he asked me to do. Tyler goes to Merge Camp with Cheryl and works with our kids ministry, and Cheryl's in charge, and she has him do, whatever it is she's doing, right? Tyler will go into Rich's life group. Clancy leads a student life group, or at least he started that by just being part of a student life group, going to it. So it is, if you're going to do that, it's going to take some intentionality. Like, it's going to take some time. Like, that's not going to fit into your schedule. And like Rich said, that's sacrifice too. But when you have a shared experience, then you're going to be like, man, what they do is hard. Or, man, I could actually help out by doing this. Or like you get the wheels turned.
Yeah. So Jeremy, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, because I was actually going to ask you, what do your staff meetings look like? What do your conversations look like where you're trying to be intentional to kind of play into this, avoiding the silos? Are there things that you do at a staff meeting or ways that you lead as far as job descriptions go that help fan the flames of working together as a team?
So I end up, having meetings with all of these different departments. And so there are times where I will then mandate some kind of a merge as best as I can. A lot of times that's a natural thing. So like there's a transition from children's ministry to student ministry. Then there's other transitions, but sometimes we just stumble upon those things. Mm-hmm. So, from a staff perspective, we all have certain things that we're better at. I'm in a meeting with Cheryl and I'm like, man, she is phenomenal at this. I want Tyler to go and sit with Cheryl and her to teach him how to do this, because it's not just the department, right? It's the skill set that's shared. And Rich has we sit under Rich to be taught about life group training. Tyler and I both did that, and then we helped teach one. But I think those things where it's like you can see if you have I guess the authority, or you have the position where you can influence that, then you have to take that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
I can say, hey, I want you to take a half a day and I want you to do this, go and spend time. Like I do that with our residents with Clancy, doing a wedding or doing a funeral. Clancy is he's incredible at it. He has it memorized. I'm getting ready to do a wedding. I put myself in and I said, hey, can you just schedule like 3 hours with me and teach me how to do this? I'm going to write it all down. Just walk me through it, and he can walk through it in his sleep. So when we start to bridge those things, the very core of that is a question of pride and humility. Mm-hmm. When we recognize that someone else on staff is better than us at this, but when we bridge it, man, it's so much stronger.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. So Tyler, you started to mention even, and Jeremy, you're alluding to this, that sacrifice piece, and how you'll sacrifice your own ministry for the good of the team. Give me an example of that if you can, or Rich, if there's something that, specific, a conversation you guys had that you're willing to let us in on.
Let me speak to that. Is that all right? So life groups ministries for a long time, when we first started, they kind of did, really, they ran however they wanted to. And pick the date that was best for you, the time that was best for you. And student ministries at the time was doing every Sunday night meetings, like youth group every Sunday night. And so there were competing events for families. My life group is meeting on this time, and my kids need to go to youth group, and they were competing against each other. So this past year we worked on so we talked about how student ministries were doing mostly life group based thing in a one Sunday night a month gathering for all of the students, middle school through high school. It's a pretty big event. Tyler can speak a little bit more about that. But what I did is I asked every life group that meets on Sundays, take that Sunday off. Don't meet on that Sunday. I'm asking that we don't have competing events for each other and for the families. Mm-hmm. And so as new groups start, I'm saying, if you're going to schedule yours on a Sunday night, I want you to take that third Sunday of the month off every month. So you have that off, so we don't compete against each other.
Nice.
Yeah. And just in the same way, like, we know that Sunday night is a life group night. And even though we have student life groups that are, I believe, just as valuable as the adult life groups, we understand that our students' families are in those life groups. And so we've kind of made the rule, because I was looking at, hey, what if we launched a student life group on Sunday night? And Rich is like, competing. And I'm like, you're right. And so, like, I've kind of said, hey, we're not going to do student life groups on that Sunday night. We're going to have them through the week. And yeah, there may be some other life groups that have it, but the majority of our life groups are meeting on that Sunday night. And so we want to be able to say, hey, we're not going to, compete either, and compete back. And that way, oh, hey, you need a babysitter, and you don't have like any high school kids or junior high kids. Hey, we can help connect. And that way, and you're not then pulling kids out of the youth ministry in order to watch, kids in the life group. Mm. And so, like, we sacrifice. Could we have a really good attendance on a Sunday night life group? Probably, but it's going to compete. And it's then, if we're truly as a church looking to take students into adult ministry, into the overall church, we can't silo them out and say, hey, we're going to just give you all the training and you're going to know how to lead worship. But if they don't know how to connect with adults, if they don't know how to live life with adults, they're not going to then connect in once they become an adult, because they're just going to feel like, this isn't really my church anymore. But now when our kids graduate, and even in high school, they feel like this is my church, not just my youth ministry.
Nice. So this may be a short rabbit trail. Hopefully we'll keep it that way. But just a question that popped in my head, and if I'm thinking, and I'm sure somebody watching this is maybe thinking it, but in your life groups then, do you have your students, elementary, middle school, high school, are they involved in those small groups? Are they there? You mentioned having childcare, and high school students, maybe you're helping to run that. Like, what does that dynamic look like in your generations within your life groups?
Are you speaking on adult life groups then?
Yep. Yeah.
So I usually leave that up for the life group leader to decide that. Most of the time it's just the adults meeting on that night. And there are some groups that will have like probably middle school age kids up. So there are some like multi-generational, but the majority of our life group time is for adult time.
Gotcha. Awesome.
At the same time, when you have a student that just goes in and does a meal with a bunch of adults, or they come over to the house or go and are just around, that fosters that relationship. And so even though it may be like adult content and adult, like all that like stuff and driven, you still have those relationships being built.
Yep. No, that's really good. Yeah, that's really good. I think one of the things that I'm curious to hear from you guys too is as you're talking about this and you've been working hard at this for a number of years, what are some of the benefits that you're seeing your whole church have together as you've worked hard to pull in the same direction?
I know one thing for us as a talking student ministry specific, we have an enormous amount of volunteers now, which not many youth pastors will say that. Normally they're searching for people. We have on our monthly gathering, we have about 100 students and we have 50 adult leaders there. They're not all just some of them are just part of the worship team. Others are, doing check-ins. Others are, serving food. And so it's running the gamut of, what their roles are. But all of a sudden, because we've been working together, now all of a sudden, even relationally, it's we want to invest because we see our students serving on hospitality team on Sunday morning. And so we're going to serve, and we want to serve the kids on, and so for me personally, I've seen a lot of our adults be willing to jump in because they have relationships and they're like, yeah, this is important. And I can now serve with my life group. And so we have entire life groups that are saying, hey, we want to come and we want to serve as a life group.
Very cool. Very cool. Jeremy, what are some things, maybe benefits you've seen from working together and pulling in the same direction?
Yeah, so I think just in general, when you fight with someone or when you fight for someone, you just gain more love and respect for that person. And when you get involved in ministries that are not yours, you're not in charge of them, and you can come and serve in those ministries, it solidifies that relationship in a deeper level. And so we've seen, I think, that increase across our staff, but even across our church, that people, they fight for each other more. They have more love for each other. And that is like a cumulative effect. And so the team becomes stronger and then stronger again. And so you start to get like a momentum there that you're fighting for the other way. You're just fighting for it, and it doesn't exist because you can't manufacture love and respect in a relationship. It's a result of experiences and trust and those things Tyler was talking about, which is a result of time. So when you bridge the time, those things start to form naturally, and they'll be that strong trying to pull them apart too. So just the strength has increased. It's increased tremendously. Really has.
That's very cool. I'm sure if I gave you guys more time to think on that and process through, there may be others, because Tyler, I loved what you were saying. It really is like that sacrifice for your own ministry. It's playing the long game for the church as a whole. And so you're investing in not just a season or a year, but you're investing over the course of time. And that transition for students in children or youth ministry, that's huge. To be able to help integrate them into the church as a whole once they become adults, and even provide opportunities, ways where they can serve and remain connected. I love that. So let's kind of turn the corner a little bit here. We're going to run out of time if we don't. I think one of the things that now is you guys you've talked about this, you've had good conversations, you're wrestling through with what does this look like? What are some possible signs that for you as an individual or somebody within your team that you're starting to become siloed or disconnected from the rest of the church? What are some of those warning signs now that you see?
Yeah, I think that, all of a sudden, because every year it seems like in youth ministry, you're launching a new year. And like that when that school year comes around, and you can have your, hey, we're gonna have this theme throughout the year, or we're gonna try to accomplish, like, here are the goals for the year. And when you start putting out, and I think goals are great, but when you start putting out things that are so separate and isolated from the rest of your church, or when you have a different mission and value than your church, like I said earlier, like as a youth ministry, if like our mission statement and vision statement is learn it, live it, give it. It's the exact same as our churches. And so if I would say, hey, we're going to now change it to this, and it might be a great idea, but what that's going to do is it's going to trend me towards siloing. It's going to trend me towards, hey, I want to, do that. And if it's just a youth ministry event, and if I don't want any help, and, so I think once you start to get in that mindset of, I don't want help and I want to do it this way, and I don't really care about the rest, and you really got to check your own heart, because it's super important not to get to that place. I know for me, I don't hardly ever make a decision that even like a medium-sized decision without first going to Jeremy and saying, hey, what do you think about this? Or Clancy, hey, thinking about doing this. 90% of the time, Jeremy's like, yeah, cool, go for it. Or, yep, I'm good with that. Or, hey, did you think about this? I'm like, no. He's like, and then we work it out and make it better. And just those little conversations, it may be a 2-minute conversation, but those conversations make it to where I'm not siloing my ministry to my ministry, but then, no, this is a ministry of the church.
Good.
Yeah, I would also say that just what I talked about before, if you're celebrating a victory when you're losing, that means you're siloed. If you are fighting over resources, that means you're siloed. If you are setting things up that directly compete with something on the rest of your team, by that I mean children's ministry, or that means you're siloed.
Yeah. Wow. Those are good. Those are very good. Rich, anything for you that in small groups, or even having been a volunteer in your church, man, that would be a warning sign or a possible sign that your ministry is becoming siloed?
I would probably speak more towards the attitude that you might have in the staff meeting, and somebody's saying they're going to do this, and then you're like, no, I'm doing this. Or you're leaning into your selfish tendencies and what you want more than what's best for the team. I would say that just personally, that's something, as I came on staff, my main focus was life groups, and Jeremy did a great job of helping me understand we're one team, man. We've got to work together. And as soon as he said that, I'm like, yeah, you're right. That's biblical. We're the body of Christ, made up of many different parts, but we're all one. So I had to fight against the selfish tendencies that make me want to do what I want to do or what I think is best, and say, okay, what's best for everyone?
I love it. Yeah. So
one of the benefits of that, Eric, just real quick, is just from a sports perspective, sometimes you see these guys in high school that are football players, and in high school they're a quarterback, but then they go to some place like Ohio State and become a defensive back or a wide receiver, and you're like, what in the world? How can you go from being a quarterback to a wide receiver? And really, what they're built for is a wide receiver. That's what they really are. They just happen to be a quarterback because there was no one that could be the quarterback at that time, and they could fill the spot. When you're not siloing, the quarterbacks get to be quarterbacks, and the wide receivers get to be wide receivers. And Rich will find someone and be like, man, that is a youth ministry person right there. They're leading an adult life group, but they need to be in youth ministry. And he will give that person to Tyler. And the same thing. And ultimately, that guy wasn't going to make it in college as a quarterback because he wasn't. And so when we're seeing the giftings and the abilities that are volunteers have, or that God's wired them, we get the joy of seeing them use that in the proper channel. And man, sometimes that would never happen if you were siloed.
Yeah.
Those are conversations that we're actually having about real people. We're realizing that this person, now that Tyler and I train together, I can see things that I've seen in life group ministries over the years and say, this guy's the guy. Like, this couple is ready. Like, let's move forward with them. And we have real conversations about real folks that we think are ready to take a next step because we're sharing things together now.
Very cool. So for a staff or a pastor, ministry leader that's watching this, and they're sitting there maybe realizing, oh my word, there's maybe some ways that I've become siloed, or our church isn't pulling in the same direction like we could be. What would be some advice that you guys would give to them? How do they begin those conversations? Maybe there's a youth pastor watching this, Tyler, that is realizing our youth ministry is totally siloed from the rest of our church. And maybe they've worked on that before. Maybe they've tried to bring it up. What do they do? What advice would you give to them in that situation?
Yeah, I would say, as simple and as comical as this may be, if that's starting to happen and you're not getting that buy-in, or you're, wherever, go take your senior pastor out and play a round of golf. Because more than likely it is because there's no relationship there. And so the deeper relationship that you have, like, the more you care about the job. One of my best friends is an engineer. I know nothing about engineering. I know nothing about building in the brake systems that he does, but I care about it. I ask him about it. I ask, there's times where we'll talk and I'll help him process something at work, and, on a relational level, or and I don't understand full context, but I can be that sounding board. And so, and there's been times where I help him, and then vice versa. He jumps in and helps me, because there's that relationship. And so, when there's hurt and there's pain and there's like this unity, spend time together. We do a staff retreat every year. And one of the things that, that I think is a high value. And I think Jeremy, I don't know if Jeremy would probably say it a different way than this, but a high value is just have fun together, because that allows us to build that relationship and that trust. We're going to, get some work done and, focus and dream and all that stuff. But when we can have fun together, and just as Jeremy was talking about earlier, like, spend that time, all of a sudden, like, I understand somebody else's perspective, and I didn't realize that they had all of this going on. That's why they haven't been, really helping me that much, or whatever the issue is. And so spend time together outside of work as friends and just build that relationship.
And maybe, honestly, it means that pastor, that youth pastor, they need to be intentional and communicate. This is why I'm asking you to dinner. This is why I'm asking you to go play golf, because I don't understand, or I want to build that relationship, or I've got a set of questions that I'd like to ask you. Probably all know people in ministry that they don't have relationships with their teammates, and they really are just kind of doing their same thing, and they check in from time to time. But I think what I'm hearing you guys say is there's such intentionality in what you're doing and in the conversations you're having that changes everything. That's encouraging to me. Jeremy, anything you would encourage?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with Tyler. That's spot on. And I would just add this. Many people have a job where they're producing a product, right? And they can go to work and they don't have to really care about the other person. They just have to get the job done. Our product is relationships. It's discipleship, following Jesus. And Jesus's command is, if you love me, you will obey what I command. Love one another. So our job is to teach people what it means to love one another. If we don't do that on staff, we should not be surprised if that's not happening in our churches. So if you do not have this between a youth pastor and a senior pastor, and when I say love, I mean, we're Bible people on here. I mean agape love. I don't mean, phileo love. And maybe you have that, and if you do, that's awesome. But you don't have to have that. But you do have to have agape love. And if you don't have that, you're not pursuing it. Tyler came from a background before where that wasn't demonstrated. And so, of course, it's going to be siloed. Of course. So I could not agree more with that. It's the fundamental aspect of it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really good. Rich, anything on your end? Just an encouragement you'd give to a pastor who's feeling siloed? What do they do? What can they step into?
I think that these guys hit it spot on. My 2 words would be, and be intentional and teachable. I think that you're seeking out other folks for them to help you with things. I think when you approach people with an attitude of humility, and I see these things and maybe I could use help, that opens the door for them to step into your world, but you also to glean something from them.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing. This has been well worth the price of admission and then some. So thank you. Obviously, these are free. We're giving these away. We love that you guys were willing to share of your time today and just invest in our churches. I'm confident that God's going to use this in a powerful way for any church team that's watching this. And if you're watching this and you're a youth pastor or you're a children's worker or you're the lead pastor and your team isn't watching it together, man, get your team in front of this video and use some of these questions to dig deep into your ministries, to evaluate where we at, how are we working together as a team, are we pulling in the same direction? I think all of those are tremendous, valuable things. And as you guys were saying, check your heart. Where's your relationships at with your team? Are you teachable? Are you being intentional in how you lead? This has been awesome. Tyler, thank you for speaking up and pitching this idea to us here at CE National. We value feedback. We love hearing ideas because if there's something that you're doing well or something that you've been through as a church, then it's going to add value to somebody else. So thank you guys all for joining us today. Tyler, if you would just close us in prayer, and if you'd be willing to pray for anybody who's watching this video and their team.
Yeah. God, we love you, and it is all for you, and it's all about you, and I pray that we would always keep that in the forefront of our mind. It's not about individual ministries, but it's about your ministry. And so, God, I pray just over the people that are that are watching this, that you would just lead them by your Spirit, so that we have healthy churches, because we want churches to be healthy because it's what you've asked us to do. And so, God, we ask that you would lead us well. God, we ask that you would bless relationships within staffs at churches. That is just a huge part of this. And God, we want you to be glorified in every situation. So God, we thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. It can be sometimes a difficult or an awkward conversation. And God, I pray that we would all take a hard look at ourselves and our ministries to see if we are siloing or on that track, and that we would be able to avoid going down that pathway. And so God, we love you. We give you all the praise and honor and glory. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys again for your time and joining us. And thank you at home for watching us. You can check out the rest of our digital labs that we've done by searching CE National on YouTube or on Facebook. And you can also on our Facebook and all our social media check out the upcoming digital labs that we're going to continue to do for the next several weeks. So thank you on behalf of Tyler and Jeremy and Rich. My name's Eric Miller for CE National. We're signing off. Thanks again.